So previously in this training, we cover the basics, no? What is SAFETAG? How it's structured? I showed you this Lego image like, I don't know, 30 times or something like that. Where do we find the framework? Um, and basically other information that could be nice to understand better what is SafeTag and when is the right thing to do and when it isn't. How to structure the audit and how to prepare it. All the pre audit activities that we should consider to start this process with an organization. Basically the green box there, okay? And now today we'll be focusing more on the initial activities when you are conducting the audit in place, okay? Yes. Uh, Again, for me, it's very interesting, and for many of us people doing SafeTech, that we see this process as an iteration. I'll be giving you many examples during our journey, but basically, you can structure or have an idea of how do you want to structure these activities. However, in the middle of the process, you can find new information, and with this new information, you might be interested into going back and to repeat some of the tests you did, or maybe repeating an interview just to dive deeper on a topic that is new for you because you discovered it in the middle of the process, etc. Yeah, and well, today will be easy. Today will be like soft. We'll be talking more about threat assessments, data assessments or information flow assessments, and process analysis. Okay. For many of us, these are the most interesting activities to conduct at the beginning of the audit, because with this we are gathering massive amounts of information that will help us to design better the details of what we will be do during the audit. It's not the same that through an interview with management, somebody in management, they give you an idea of what they think are the problems. However, when you start working in the office with the people or start interviewing, if it's remote, some other people that were involved in that initial interview process, you will find most sure that than not, like there are many processes that you didn't knew, or infrastructure that you weren't aware of. Maybe a lot of times management tells me that our process to share information is this process that is very secure, that we assess this with, I don't know, IT people, etc. And then when you talk with people, you discover that like only management is using this thing because it's too cumbersome, too complicated for the rest of the staff, and they are using other processes to share information among themselves. For instance, some will say that they are using flash drives when they are in the same office, or some others will say, we have a server that nobody thinks about that server, but we are using it just to have a shared folder and everybody's dropping whatever they want to share there. So that's a very important piece of information to know, and that's the things, the kind of things that you discover when you are in place or talking directly with people. Yeah. So that's the reason we want to tackle these activities at the very beginning of the project, or at least that's again, as I said in last session, there are different styles. So you might be interested in to explore your own style, and probably for you it will work different. But for a big group of us, we prefer to start gathering this information before starting with the more technical parts. Well, and these activities are usually done in person. Um, uh, Usually when you do this in person, includes many post-it notes, because you will be brainstorming a lot and moving information from place to place a lot. And one of the biggest challenges we had after the pandemic was what can we do? What can we do when everything was remote? Um, like yeah, and for some people, the solution was to rely on new platforms or new interesting approaches, etc. So in this case, for instance, some people started using, I don't know if you know Mural or Miro or other tools that emulate all of this ecosystem of having post-its in a wall, but they are in the screen. All of that were options. Okay, we will be talking about this a little bit more. And also other people tested in a couple of audits. I did that, just relying on interviews, like, or trying to model the same outputs from these activities and translate those to the interview format. Okay. Great. So the first and probably the biggest activity that we are including here is the threat assessment. So what is it? What is it useful for? Here you'll have I'll try my best to put here which method or activity is related to the section I'm trying to cover. In this case, threat assessment it would be the method in this case that has like I don't know 3-4 activities associated to it. And basically, what's the goal of doing a threat assessment? For me, is was crystal clear once I read this definition at some or this idea at some point. You want to transform all the concerns and all the fears in the organization into information, useful information, and an action plan, like a list of things you need to do. So, it's a reality that a lot of people, a lot of organizations, they are at risk, and there's no way around it. They are at risk, period. So we need to deal with that situation in a way that is constructive for them, and also constructive for the activity that we are conducting. I'm not only talking about the threat assessment, but that is constructive to the whole auditing process. So some things we will need: first, honesty. We need them to be honest and open with us regarding their security, their problems, their fears, all of that. That's the way, or that's a fundamental ingredient that we will need to make sure that we are covering all the relevant pieces in their work during an audit. Okay. And so it's okay if some of these people are scared of some of these scenarios, etc., but it is good to remind them that the goal here is to transform that into actionable plans and to be better prepared in case something bad happens. And also, the goal is to identify and classify these risks or threats. We are going to cover some concepts in a bit. But yeah, so classifying, understanding what's more important to address than the other things, all of that is important. Yeah, and this is a big one for me, especially. I have seen a lot of organizations that they are worrying about the wrong stuff. Probably, maybe they 3 years ago they suffer from some form of attack or aggression or some threat that materialized, and after that they became super over obsessed with that kind of problem with all the I mean the reason. However, after some time passed, they were worrying too much about that, and they were overlooking other aspects of their security that are also important, that and could be also a source of problems, of real problem. Yeah, the same thing happens kind of in the opposite way. Some organizations are trying to cover everything, and they are spread too thin, and they are not giving enough attention to specific real and potential threats they are facing. Okay, so that's also important. And this also a big one for me. I wouldn't I put this in the slide more from experience than from theory, because it's very usual that people in the organizations, they don't talk about risk, they don't talk about security a lot in most organizations. So it's very usual that when you are facilitating these activities, themselves, they are starting to realize that their perceptions of risk are very different among the staff. Maybe we have a group that believe that they are more comfortable, and the other group is like, are you not seeing this, like this bad thing can happen at any moment, is very real. And these activities are like a very very good space to cover all of this stuff. Yes. So, some definitions. I won't bore you too much because we have a lot to cover. Maybe you have seen this in, I don't know, the academic world or any other kind of trainings that are talking more about security and risk, that are not only usual in information security or digital security, but in many other uh, kinds of security or areas covering security. So just to handle the same language, threat. A threat is a negative event that might occur. Okay, it's a bad thing that might happen. Okay, maybe an example that we are that I got mocked in the street and my cell phone is stolen, for instance. That's a threat. It doesn't well, did happen many years ago, but that's another story. But it's just a hypothetical scenario. It could be a threat here. The risk, these two terms are used a lot interchangeably. However, there is a subtle difference here. The risk is the possibility of a threat occurring, okay? That indeed that bad thing happens. So probably is a bigger, higher risk. I don't know, that maybe I just trip my feet with the bed and it will hurt, than meeting aliens or something like that. Both are valid hypothetical scenarios. However, one is more possible than the other with our current information or the current context, basically. Um, what else? We have here vulnerability. Vulnerability is a condition of weakness or a lack of protection for a specific threat. Okay, I can go into my eternal example of a website hacking, and then you can say that a vulnerability is that we don't have DDoS protection, for instance, or that a vulnerability for my Gmail address is that my password is, I don't know, my birthday and the name of my cat, or that is a weakness in against the actual threat of my Gmail address, my Gmail account being yeah, taken. And besides that, we have also impact. There is the degree in which something can be affected by a threat occurring. Probably it will have a bigger impact, or comparing again the hitting my feet with the bed in the morning and crashing with my car, like that. Probably the impact of these two things are very different, and we can kind of assess which one is bigger than the other. And also the likelihood, how probable is the occurrence of a threat. In these exercises, is very common, very 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 common, that we are mapping things that are actually happening, that or they happen frequently. We have countries where, I don't know, the internet service providers, they censor the access to certain applications, to talk, to communicate, or services. Yeah, we have people that they have raids with the police, like every now and then, like at least they expect like once in a year to be to receive a visit from the police. All of these things happens in many places. So we need to juggle between how possible, how probable, how probably is this to happen, versus this is happening in the real world. It's not necessarily a probability, but we need to assess more the frequency that this happens. But at the same time, there are many organizations that never went into never had a raid with the police, but they should maybe consider this also as a threat. And then the question would be how we assess the probability of this happening. And for some, it's kind of funny because in Google Images I put like risk equation, and you will find 100 different things. However, in the more simple way to abstract all of this problem, for some people, risk is the impact times the likelihood of something to happen. No? We are going to talk about this eventually. So yeah, now in practice, like how does this work? The step zero, like before even starting the actual activity, is very important to understand who is participating in the activity. Here I have like a observation. There may be very different ways to approach this. And at some point in the past, I tried to make this activity with no more than 8 people, just to have enough time to talk with everybody can talk, and yeah, to make sure that the activity was ordered. Okay. However, in many organizations, not everybody wants to participate in the same way. Also, with big organizations, happens a lot that you end up with the directives or the coordinators of areas, that they don't have a lot of insight of what it's happening completely in their areas, or you end up working with probably interns or other people that, again, they don't have a lot of insight of what is happening at the management level. So I have tried like very small activities, and I really didn't like it that much. And I have tried the opposite approach, like having an organization of, I don't know, 40 people, like bring everybody who wants to join, and having a number very very similar to 40. And even when it was also a bad idea, because there was a lot of people and all of them were talking a lot and participating a lot, I preferred that approach, because then the amount of information that I had at the end was super super valuable. It changed the way I did that audit. For instance, a couple of audits I did with that approach in this activity. Also, understanding how much time do we have. It's not the same to have 2 hours than to have one day. I have been in these two also versions of this activity, and usually 2 hours is not enough. Maybe in 2 hours you can probably only do threat assessments. A threat assessment for a small organization, it might work. However, for bigger organizations, it might be you may fall short on time for some pieces. And with this, I'm talking about not only the threat assessment, but also threat assessment, data assessment, and process assessment. There are 3 activities, and having 2 hours for these 3 activities is not a lot. For me, I'm leaning usually for half a day when I'm doing this in person. And if we need to reduce this time, then I try to be as creative as I can be. And for instance, only conducting threat assessment, and the other pieces with data assessment and process assessment, I include that in other activities with interviews and stuff like that. But as I have said, like a lot of times by now, like it depends on your style. Like there are many ways to solve this problem, and yeah, whatever rocks your boat. So yeah, also the dynamic is very different. The way this works, depending on the organization. I had organizations in audits that where the executive directors are there, and that's kind of a dictatorship. So it's like everybody's scared to talk, and they look at the executive director, and they try to say, like, almost as asking for permission to share something or things like that. There are other organizations that are super open, super horizontal, and again, this is something we also might be able to assess and to check the temperature. And how we start, like, we bring everybody together. It will be completely facilitated. We'll be alone. It's not the same to conduct this by myself, compared if I have one or two more people. There are many ways to start these activities. And there are also a spectrum of activities that we can conduct. However, I prefer to go to these extremes, to the ends of this spectrum, kind of, and give you two proposals for this activity. The first one is the easiest one, the quick and dirty version. Well, not dirty, but quick for sure. The 5 questions. This you can find this activity laid out in the security surveillance self-defense, I believe, the EFF. um I'll try to bring this site now into the screen. This one, you will have the link in the slides. This is something I won't read, but you will have a lot of valuable information on how to conduct a very quick threat assessment. um no, going back, excellent. And the second proposal is building a risk matrix. Maybe again, some of you already know the risk matrix, but we'll be reviewing this a little bit in detail in a couple of minutes. The 5 questions, great, easy. If you have a small problem, if you have something quick that you want to assess its security, or if also you have not a lot of time to assess this with the group, maybe you can concentrate in facilitating this part, this activity. The first thing is, what I do I want to protect. Basically here the idea is to say, we as an organization, what's the most important and delicate, sensitive thing for us that we have to protect. In some cases, it would be our sources if they are a media outlet. It might be the victims if they are human rights offenders. It may be very varied. I even have asked some organizations this question, and basically they say the funding. So it's like, okay, the funding. So, or it might be different things that the different ways the organization can approach the what is the most important thing for them. But also there may be different many different answers to this question. Maybe it's not like I want to only choose one important thing, but maybe the important thing here might be the victim's information, but also the cases on human rights violations can also be another thing I want to protect, because this is very difficult to rebuild, because if we lost it or we compromise this, it might be void, not valid in a court and an international court, and all of these things are very important. And so when an organization has like many different things they want to protect, and they are too different, it will be interesting to ask all of these questions for each one of these aspects. Another usual question here is, who do I want to protect it from? This might make a world of difference. Okay, in one hand you have repressive governments, but in another hand you have companies for me was kind of a revelation when I started working with environmental organizations, that usually their biggest, or one of the biggest adversaries there were private companies that, I don't know, they want to build a power plant in a river or things like that. And understanding better the adversaries can help us to understand better their capacities. It's not the same to be a big company than to be a government in terms of the access that they have to things. We have seen repressive countries where intelligence organisms or law enforcement, they have irrestricted access to phone calls, logs, information, because they have a very direct access to phone companies. However, maybe a company doesn't have that kind of access, but they maybe can employ other tactics, and that's very very important to know during this process. A third question here is, how bad are the consequences if I fail? So if we lose the information on the victims or the human rights violations, or if our journalist sources are disclosed, how bad is that for us? And we can try to develop that. It would be it's very interesting when we are conducting these kind of activities, that for many organizations, uh, almost the first thing they think is about reputation and credibility. Like, if my victim information is disclosed, probably I'm making other people, they will avoid us to report, to tip on give us a leak on the topic that we are covering, etc. It's interesting, but I mean, it's anecdotal. There may be other bad consequences. There may be people in jail, the physical integrity of people at risk. There may be many different kind of things that might fall into this question, and our task is to find out. And how likely is that I will need to protect it? This sounds like, how likely is the bad thing to happen? Okay, how probably is that thing will happen? So again, how probably is that we will lose the information on our victims, or we'll lose the database with whatever court case or anything. um, for instance, for organizations that they work with courts, I discovered that, I'm not a lawyer, that the litigation strategy is super important. Apparently, it's like how they will approach things, and apparently this should be kind of secret or confidential, because if the counterpart knows the strategy, they might come with another strategy that is designed to counter this other one. Is a kind of a excited thing, but it's very sensitive information. So how likely is that our litigation strategy will be disclosed to the counterparts? That is also interesting. And how much trouble I'm willing to go through to try to prevent potential consequences. That's the formal way to ask how much, how what things I'm willing to do to avoid all this stuff. Okay, so I'm willing to spend money on, or I'm able to spend money on that. How much money? I'm able to. I'm willing to change processes. All of these things are very good to explore. So if you are conducting this activity, my recommendation is that you go step by step. Like, don't present the 5 questions, just go first one, second one, and go on, and give a healthy amount of minutes, so to go to all of these, and to map as much as you can map. This again, I believe I hinted this already, but this is best for small problems. If you are assessing a very small organization, 8 people with a very specific mandate, with very specific tasks, this activity is very very good for that. However, when you have bigger organizations, this might be a problem, because if you have a big organization and they are, for instance, managing 6 different projects, uh, reducing the problem to these 5 questions might turn complicated, very complex. So for this, now the proposal, or maybe the suggestion, would be to use a risk matrix. Sorry in advance for those of you that already know this, but basically, in practice, the way this is a workflow, okay, that we follow when we are covering big problems or more complex ones. The first thing we do with the risk matrix, and I will show you an example, um, is that first you introduce what is going to happen. We are going to think about bad things that might happen, so don't feel worried, don't feel concerned, because we are looking forward to address those fears during the audit process, and to make you feel better and safer at the end of this process about those things we are mapping today. Then you go to a phase of brainstorming potential threats, and then for each one of those threats, you will try to assign a level of impact, and after you assign a level of impact, then you go and assign them a likelihood, like how probable is that these threats one by one will happen. And then you review the result. I'm gonna tell you a couple of stories at that point, but um, here there are two that I had two ways to do this. The way I'm doing it, that is showing you like a step-by-step process, or trying to do something like together in a more interactive way. For now, I'm modeling a lot of these things in this workshop, being mindful about the time, especially your time of the day. So I don't want to shake you too much. Also, you are from different organizations, so it will be kind of more difficult to do an exercise together. So for now, I'm just showing you information. For Thursday, you will be doing more interactive things, I promise. Um, so yeah, this is one example of the first step. You start asking people how they would think about, are you scared of something that might happen? Yes, what is it? And then you grab a post-it or whatever other tool you have, and you put that in the wall. No, so here you have very common the examples. When we build this exercise, these images, we try to use real examples, like things that are very recurrent in our audits. I will maybe just point a couple of them in case you cannot read them. Data of meetings and stakeholders are leaked. Data of victims is leaked. Maybe you will hacking mail accounts. Maybe malware that disables work teams, things like that. Also, there are more fatalist things here, like the absence of the director. It's kind of awkward in some organizations where you do these activities, but if for some reason you are dealing with a very extreme risk organization, be prepared, because some people might say, okay, we need to address what happens if any of us got killed or something like that. Then you can start entering a more trauma territory, or more high risk. This might be triggering for some people in the room. You will need to manage that situation the best way possible. Some tips. The first one, it will depend on your style. As always, I won't stop repeating this. Second thing is that you need to check the group. Sometimes we are having very difficult conversations, and the people are very well equipped to deal with this. This especially is true for organizations that are dealing with war crimes, with fundamental human rights violations, that because they are exposed to this kind of stuff, and they kind of they're most used to this kind of threats materializing and stuff like that. So one way we can try to navigate that as well is to be careful with the language. It's not the same that the director is killed than maybe the absence of the director. The way the organization wants to frame this would be important, and you might reach a point where you reach a balance between people in the room being comfortable and you actually documenting the accurate information. So that's another point that could be good to start to point here. Another thing that is important: we are not limiting ourselves to digital security. It's crucial that we here include anything. It's legal. It's that I don't know, the tax authority fine us with a really high amount. That physical security, that I don't know, some journalists got beaten in the streets, covering in a high risk place or things like that. All of that should be documented, because one of the realizations in this field is that everything is connected. So you may have digital vulnerabilities, problems, threats, etc., that might have as a consequence a very physical thing, and vice versa. You might have I don't know, maybe somebody got their phone stolen. That's a very physical thing, but it might have digital implications. So try to see everything as connected, and yeah, that would be also important. Cool. Once you have the list of this brainstorming of ideas, then you will try, or we should try to assign them an impact. So this is the way I used to work most of the time. I create a grid from 1 to 10, and where 1 is nothing, like the impact is that doesn't impact us at all, and 10 is critical, like the organization won't be able to operate anymore. And after we have this grid, we start asking, like, if you lose the backup, how much impact do you think it will have? Something like, not that much, because I don't know, we have another backup or whatever thing. So well, maybe a 4, maybe a 5, maybe a 3, and then you try to reach to a point where you put this in a place where everyone is happy, and go on. So probably attack against the physical integrity of a victim. So this is terrible. Okay, how terrible? Do you believe that this is the most terrible thing that might happen? And people may say, no, maybe put in a 9, because I mean, it will be terrible. However, the organization won't stop working. Then you start understanding how they see the organization priorities. And so on. For instance, I put this lack of electricity as a big impact, because in many organizations they use internet. Without electricity they have nothing, and they work a lot using internet. Just an example. But here, maybe for you, or some other organizations, the lack of electricity is not that terrible. So why is it a 9? So here we are starting to see that maybe we don't agree with many of these the parts of this process, but we need the organization to let it flow. Okay, once we have all of these already mapped in terms of impacts, we do the same exercise, but with likelihood. Again, this is how I do it. I don't know, this is kind of upset the image, there's some error there, but you get the idea. I put from 1 to 10 again, where 1 is like, it's very not probable something like this is happening, and 10 is something that we are expecting. We expect it to happen, or it actually happens, or it happens a lot, very frequently in practice. So, and again, data of victims leaked. maybe for some reason this organization said something like 6, like, well, maybe a 6 because it's very probable, because for instance one of our adversaries that is a organized crime group, maybe a cartel, they already said that they want and they will have the information of these victims, so we are expecting them to try. But put it at 6, maybe not a 10, maybe not a 9, because this information is also decently protected, so it will be hard for them to do it, but we are expecting it to them to try. So for some reason, maybe I'm just making up a story behind why this that is a 6, and so on. Okay. For instance, the lack of electricity again. This probably is heavily influenced by some countries in Latin America where we made a lot of audits, where there were a lot of electricity issues. So it's very probable for them, like 7 out of 10, that they will be without electricity. But in many other countries, this is not even an option. This will be like a 1 or a 2, because it's not very probable that they will lose power. Um, and after all the moving things here and there, we may have a final result. Here, there are many ways to read this. I'm not a very paranormal person. I'm not very mystic person or a spiritual person. However, I believe this is the closest thing to read the copy or to read any other thing for the organization, because this will give you an idea of the things that the organization cares about. Um, Here I put these 3 bands. It might be done differently. However, when you have something that is high risk, high impact, and high likelihood, is something that is very hard, that will affect a lot the organization, but it's also very probable that it will happen. So those are the most critical things that probably you will need to care about during the audit process, because this is what will probably happen, and the things the organization should be prepared for. That's it. In this example, we should do something about threats to victims or witness, to the leaked data of victims leaked, and a task attacks against the physical integrity of the staff, and losing the backup, for some, to say, to put this example. And then we have the ones in the yellow band, like maybe you can juggle a little bit with that. Sometimes I find in the yellow band things that are very useful to care about. Maybe even they are not in the red, in the most complicated one. However, it will help to build more security for the pieces that are critical as well. Sometimes we won't have any control on the things in the red or orange band here in the screen. But it would be interesting to see if the organization is aware of that, because sometimes we will see some risks, some threats, that we just need to accept. That's also a concept in cybersecurity, information security. You will find residual risk, I believe it would be in English the term. Yeah. For instance, here in more than one organization, I conducted this exercise, and I see that what is here in the red band is losing social media accounts and website, their website, etc. Uh, Basically, these are organizations that are more worried about their image than the mandate that they are trying to defend. That might happen. Okay. And again, the example of the organizations that are more worrying more about the funding than about the sources or the victims or things like that. At this point, it's not on us to give to judge that necessarily, but more to understand where their priorities are. And sometimes this is some things they don't realize until this exercise. I have organizations, many organizations, more than half the organizations I have conducted this exercise said that this was the most valuable part of the audit for them, because they didn't knew that the rest of the organization care about X or Y or whatever. Yeah, boring theoretical small capsule of information, how to write a thread. When we have these matrices, we need to do some processing to see where are we looking to, what infrastructure are we assessing, etc. And sometimes people will say, Carlos, just right there that we got hacked. Okay, we got hacked. That's kind of Carlos of 2016 or something like that. And I will put that into the matrix, and then it will be very confusing for everybody to do this assessment. Like, how probable is that they will hack us? And maybe people don't have a clue of how to assess that, or the impact, how impactful would be that they hacked us. And the problem here is that we were very vague. They hacked us is not no very yeah, explanatory. We need to be more specific. So at some point I tried to think more about how to write the threads, and there are four versions of the ways I write threads, or I tried to people to write threads in these ways. The simplest one, that something bad happens. Thieves break like into the office. In this case, we can try to explore a little bit more, or maybe keep it general. But the important thing is that if some thieves are entering the office, what are they doing? Like, what is the real impact of that? They are stealing the computers, they are stealing only files, they are stealing what? Okay. Another way to write the threats is that something bad happens to an asset or a resource, or an actor linked to the organization. It's the same thing, but a little bit more specific. Okay, so in this case, that we lose access to our bank accounts. That's another way to write that kind of thread. Um, and the other two are a bit more complex. However, they are very, very good for us to post-processing the results of the metrics. Basically, that an actor performs an action over an asset or resource, provoking certain consequences. That sounds like a puzzle, but or a yeah, tongue twister. But in reality, the thing that I want to point here is that in the threat, it's good to have the adversary. In that example, that the intelligence organism in my country monitors the phone calls with our journalist sources, an optional compromising their physical integrity. Like, it's a more robust way to write the thread, so you know who is monitoring these phone calls, because it might be the phone company, it might be the police, it might be organized crime, it might be any, or even in countries where we have closing environments, and we have public institutions against NGOs and stuff like that. It's usual that there may be multiple law enforcement organisms. You will have the military, you will have the intelligence, you will have the citizen police, you will have many other forms of law enforcement that it will be interesting to pinpoint. I'm worried about this specific one being able to monitor our calls. So that's a way to do it. And the other one is the same thing, but instead of an actor, is an event. Okay, that's the trick here. So instead of saying the organism is, what about an earthquake? Maybe I mean, for instance, I live in Chile. This is a true thing we can include in a risk matrix. Some of you in Southeast Asia, there are a lot of places that are very hot with earthquakes, so that might be a bad thing to be in a matrix. And in going back to the example that a power blackout leaves our office without electricity, and then we cannot work in the computers. That could be an example of an event performing an action to the asset and stuff like that. I will try to guide myself more for the examples than for the formulation, because I know it might be a little bit confusing. Um, Considerations. For me, this is the slide, the most important slide of all of this risk assessment, threat assessment session part. Uh, First, this is a qualitative risk assessment. Okay, this is not meant to be accurate. This is just a way to interpret the perceptions of the people participating in the activity. So, probably there might be threats that are not considered in the during this process, and it could be, and it happens every now and then, that I as a facilitator, I don't agree. Like, I don't believe those should be the priorities. Again, it's like, do you prefer your Instagram versus your victims? Like, this might happen, um, but we need to consider this valid information, because you want to respond to their needs, and that also involves their perceptions. um, the less we affect the activity, the better. This is the right activity to concentrate in being facilitators. Okay, uh, what we can do is the right questions. If we see that the group is kind of diverting, or focusing too much on something, it's good for us to ask, and what about these other aspects? Do you have any um, ideas or concerns about the cameras in your office? Do you have do you think there might be threats that are related to going to protests that should be included here? Like, trying to ask for some specific aspects that might be not necessarily overlooked, but not considered because they are focusing on other aspects. Yeah, that is very, very, very important. In a more operative level, we define the axis. This 1 to 10, that's a thing that I do. I mean, it's not like I invented that, not at all, but I know other people. Myself, sometimes I try new approaches, and for instance, I use 1 to 5, or I use low, mid, critical, or low, medium, high. You can try whatever works better for the group. This is an activity that relies a lot on being accommodating to the room, and to do things in whatever way it would be better for them to actually achieve the activity in a way they understand what they are doing. Okay. And another very common thing that happens is that you have 1 or 2 people inside your group that they are, for instance, what others will call paranoid about things. However, it don't necessarily means that we should treat them as they are paranoid, because nobody knows what will happen that is in that matrix. The We are formulating a lot of hypotheses that so all of them are valid. I mean, I have groups, and it could be a kind of an uncomfortable moment as a facilitator, but that's part of the job. Where you have 1 or 2 people that are too focused or too worried about something specific, that they want to raise that for you to include in the matrix, and the others are trying to, like, to shut up these persons or these people, this because they don't believe it should be considered as a big threat or whatever, or maybe it's unfounded, maybe whatever. And that's important to not bury. We need to bring this in, all of this. We need to make a stop. You need to say this opinion is also valid. We should be adding this to the matrix. If you disagree on this as a real threat, that means that for you, maybe the likelihood of this is very low, or the impact is very low, but that doesn't make it not be a threat anyway. So it's an exercise. I believe we learn a lot as facilitators to deal with these kind of situations. But in general, if you have somebody that is trying to speak up and we ignore them, that will make them to participate less, not more, and that's not good. So tip or recommendation here is, if somebody is bringing a topic, a hipster topic, or something that controversial, it worth to put that into the matrix. And then when we discuss how likely or how the impact that might have, maybe we can help the person to understand why the rest think that that's not very important or not that concerning. Or, and I have seen this as well, how you can make a case to convince the rest of the group and the big group in the organization that this is actually a problem. Like, okay, maybe you are dismissing it, but if you think about it, it might happen. So you also have the organization to reach to better agreements, and that's cool, and that feels very cool when you are facilitating these activities. Feels like couple therapy, but for the entire organization. It's cool. um, and just to wrap up a little bit the part of the risk threat assessment, how can we do this remotely? There are a couple of options. I already named some of them. You will have, for instance, Google Jamboard. You will have, the good about Google Jamboard is that is free. Like, you don't need to pay anything to use Jamboard. It's not very powerful in terms of features, but it's cool. And also you have other tools like Mural that are usually paid. However, they are very cool, very powerful, and more flexible. You can even put, there are many ways you can do this. I have tried, for instance, having Jamboard, that I am the one operating Jamboard. Imagine that we are in a room, and I am the people with the post-its in the wall, and people are telling me where to put this. It's the same thing. Also, you can have a Google Jamboard or a similar, share with all of the participants of the activity in a remote setup, and you can have people writing their own stuff and putting the post-its in the right place. It's cool because it feels more interactive. It feels that people are participating more. However, in some groups, it won't be that effective. For instance, people with problems with internet bandwidth, or people that are less, that they like less technology, so it may feel overwhelming, like having to operate all of this stuff while this guy is talking to me. It could be more complicated, so you decide depending on how this your group will be working. Some people I have seen that they have a Google Doc, and they have a list of things. I believe I can find this for you. You fill out basically kind of an Excel file, but in Google, where you are putting there the name of the threats, and you are assigning points to the likelihood and impact, and it will feel like a matrix, like a visual thing. It's cool. It's cool. It's less flashy than other, like Mural. But the real takeaway here is that it depends a lot on your style, your creativity. I have seen really crazy things in terms of facilitating these kind of activities, and that's great. Okay, it will depend on how do you see it. And some facilitation considerations, especially for remote setups. We see this every day. We might be seeing this right now. Usually, the thing of having everybody in mute without cameras, that is a burden. That's a problem for participation. So usually, making people participate in remote activities is harder than in a physical setup, because you don't know if you are, I don't know how many of you are, I don't know, eating or cooking while you're listening to me. So that kind of thing is also important. So if you see decreased participation in these interactive activities, um, what could be nice, giving them tasks, doing breaking groups so they can't work on their own, like try to wake up these people. Again, just to give a weird example that I just came up with it, if people are in their nights, like if night p.m. for you. Maybe I want to take it easy. I don't want to try to inject my 7 a.m. energy into people that are like setting going to bed soon or things like that. So you will need to think about that as well. Any questions so far? Yes, I've been talking and talking. Everything is okay. By the way, the sound, it's better than last time.
Yes, it's better.
Awesome. Um, I see I don't know again how this works, but I see a raised hand. Anton, I believe. Okay, okay. Basically, the thing here is that some organizations or most organizations they don't necessarily know about threats and risk and how we approach that if they don't know an activity like this, if they don't know exactly what a threat or a risk is. There are many ways to do this. Sometimes I never mention the word that like or I'm not too hard with risk and threat as concepts. That's one way to do it, and I just say let's brainstorm bad things that might happen, and I put it in a language that won't require a lot of detail. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to give them before the activity starts, like at least these definitions of not all of those that I showed you, but at least threat, at least the impact or likelihood, like these more close concepts that we will need for the activity. However, it's not necessary to give them the concepts if we translate that language into, let's see, bad things. What are you worried about? And start from there, and the activity usually will flow very, very good. And giving examples, that's something that might help as well. The problem with examples is which example we show them might influence the rest of the activity, because it will put already a tone, a topic, and stuff like that. However, a good trick here could be, by the time we are doing this activity, we already interviewed some people, for instance. We already know, by that time we already know how about some problems that people would need, or maybe they are starting the audit because there was a problem. So maybe you can formulate an example related to that problem or that thing is happening in the organization. So you can give them this example that is not only good in terms of how you formulate the threat, but also in a way that relates to them, and they can catch it and they say, okay, it's like this, so maybe we can start thinking about the other topics. That's the way I see it, at least. I hope that will uh, answer your question. Great. Super. um I'm gonna go to the next activity, unless you have more questions, of course. um
I kind of there's one question in it.
how to set up hybrid environments for these activities. It's difficult. It's not advisable every time. However, if you have everybody in the same room and only the person is online, it would be good, for instance, to have somebody in the organization you talked previously with, so they can help you co-facilitate the activity. That could be one approach to this, because it's way harder. One example, you cannot hear and process everybody talking at the same time. In case they are discussing among themselves, the audio won't let you do that. Technology, unfortunately, doesn't work that way. Also, sensing like the interest of the room is not the same if you are the only one that are not there. So having somebody there that you explain the activity, they know the activity, will help you a lot to conduct activity when you are the only one online. um, for instance, if you are interviewing people, before this activity, maybe you can try to choose, or with management, this person, and when you interview this person, you can do your interview, and also you can say like, okay, so you are helping me with this activity, the activity will have this structure, and please help me like gathering them together if they are too distracted or things like that. That might be one option. Another option is going fully remote, like maybe having trying to organize this in a moment where everybody is in different places and you can go fully remote. However, you are not kind of addressing the main problems here, no? And this is a good example of a setup where you can, as a facilitator, be the one operating the board, for instance. So you are suggesting the group that they need to communicate with you at all times, so you can arrange them the post-its in the right place and all that stuff. And there you might have a better engagement with them. Yeah, but yeah, I hope that helps with the question. Um, okay,
Thank you, Carlos.
super. Well, now data assessment. We kind of talk a lot about risk, and now we are covering two other activities that are very complementary. For some organizations, I prefer this activity to give more time to this activity to the compared to the risk matrix or things like that. This is a SAFETAG activity, data assessment, and basically here what we want to know is first where rests the information, where is stored the information, in computers, in notebooks, in printed files, etc. Also where the information is transmitted, the channels that the people are using, is email, is postal mail, is what that is also very very useful to know. And also classify the information according to the sensitivity. That's important. Um, Sometimes, and this is also a thing that I find a lot in organizations, is that they over concentrate, are hyper focused on one specific kind of information, and they are not paying a lot of attention to other pieces that might also be very crucial if they get compromised. So also we are trying to map that here, and identify strange patterns. Sometimes you will see, for instance, that there are secure ways to work, to send information, but people are not using them because they are too complicated. So probably they are falling to falling over to other options that are less secure, and then we will need to address that as well. A classic super classic example here is that in many organizations gathering human rights violations, complaints or reports, they have hotlines, and they use regular phone calls, and they receive phone calls there, and they receive critical information there. So that's a very classical example of things we want to address during the audit as a process. And the data assessment is a good place to watch for that. And identify hidden processes. It's also common that you have an entire department in an organization, an area where they do things differently and nobody else knows. That might be good because sometimes these processes are better, and people say, oh, we should do that as well because it's safer or it's more practical, etc. But also it might be bad in terms of other people saying, no, why are you doing this way if that's really insecure? So that could be also a situation that might arise might emerge in this activity. Yeah, so here again, two proposals. This will be hopefully more simple than the two for risk, but the first one is a spreadsheet. Think about this as a physical equivalent. Like We used to do this exercise in person. However, we really like the way it worked in the digital version, to a point that many of us or some of us are using this even if we are in the same room. If I'm in the same room, I will try to bring a TV or bring a projector or something and try to fill this thing. Basically, it's a massive brainstorm of uh, first the information at rest, and then the information in transmission. So we first are trying to map the external the things, the places where this information might be stored, and try to assess right away. This is kind of a shortcut, to be honest, but it mostly works to try to assess the sensitivity of the information stored there. So you say, we have external hard drives, and then you try to ask them, like, okay, but and what are you storing there? Some people will say, well, here I have the cases of human rights violations when I'm trying to bring this to the other computer where we store the central database. I'm making things up. So you say, this is maybe high or maybe critical. You choose here your right option, no? We have personal computers, but it's not that terrible because we have a policy that says that we don't store anything personal in the personal computers, information about people here in the computers. However, I don't know, we have there a couple of reports that we haven't published yet. Okay, the baby is medium, the sensitivity of the information in that device. File cabinets, never forget the physical mediums. In that infamous audit that I told you, that I described to you last session, it was a organization of lawyers that had decades of experience, and they had entire rooms of folders with cases of human rights violations, very old, some of them cases that are still open. And for them, having that room with a lot of folders was critical, because all the meat of victim information and the actual violations, pictures, all of those things were there. And for instance, one thing that happened to this organization was that for a period of time, the room wasn't in a good condition to store papers, old papers, and some weird fungus basically ate a lot of folders. So that's the level of maybe not so digital that we can get on these audits. It's important to say, okay, if it's critical what you have in that room, maybe we should be researching how we make sure that these papers are not just getting rotten or getting damaged by time. So they bought a dehumidifier, like just to have a more dry environment and mitigate the potential fungus or other things happening to these papers or stuff like that, just to give you that example. And also in the right side, in the green side, we'll have the information in transmission, and here we are interested in the communication channels. Okay, phone calls, Signal, WhatsApp, SMS, Zoom, and same thing. What things are we talking about in our phone calls? Okay, we are sharing the actual. We are talking with sources here, anonymous sources. So probably, yeah, this is critical. Or maybe we have a person working in a public institution that is leaking information that is important, and this person might get into trouble if they discover them. So probably, yeah, in phone calls we are transmitting critical information. With other source we are talking with through Signal. Okay, it's also critical because it's the same information but it's a different channel, and so on. You can feel this a lot, and once you do this, you can go to the. I made an effort to translate this file. I didn't translate it at names, but here we are. The version you will receive will have everything in English. The second, that is output, you will have something like this. All these are all formulas, so you can see where the critical information is managed, and this will be very cool for us to right away start suggesting things. I do this activity and I have this, and I already know one recommendation in my report, that is try to avoid this situation. If you have report process for human rights violation victims and we have a hotline, that's okay, because you are having a broad spectrum of we are making sure more people can reach out to us. Maybe we can modify the process, and every time people call and say, I was victim of this, you can tell them, okay, before you give me your personal data, can we can we move this conversation to another channel? Like, do you use WhatsApp? Do you have Signal? Probably no, because it's like a NOS thing in the community. But in case they have Signal, we can move the information to that other channel. And that's a very, very common recommendation I give to these kind of groups when phone calls are a problem. Okay. Especially for organizations, for instance, working anti-corruption. Fighting against corruption, it has an issue, because you don't know where it may be the phone company, it may be corruption in the telecom or law enforcement. It may be so broad that a lot of unintended people might have access to these phone calls. So we try to move phone calls, delicate, sensitive information to other channels, things like that. Okay, maybe here right away I can see, well, I will in my the interviews, I will try to ask more about the external hard drives. Maybe I will suggest that these should be encrypted, or maybe they should have a safe box, and after the shift ends, they can store these and protect these disks and these hard drives in a safe box, things like that. SMS, please don't. If it's sensitive information, just stop using SMS as a way to sharing the sensitive information, and so on. I mean, that's it. I could go on and on and on and on describing this process, but you will have a better idea when you see the file, you play with the file, or of course, if you have any questions, I can take them without any problems. Another approach, another proposal, if you feel like super rigorous and you have like a lot of time to do this, you can use this resource. Full disclosure 1, I built this resource. Full disclosure 2, the translation is really bad. I'm working on really bad, but they have some errors that I'm working to fix soon enough, hopefully. And here we will have more detailed activities on how to map information. For instance, this one, mapping and stakeholder classification, we will have, before talking about data, we'll be trying to map. This is very similar to other workflows and guides. For instance, the holistic security one is basically the inspiration for this. And let me try data mapping and classification. This is the most important one. It's very similar to what we are to what we did in the file, but in another way. Like, this is very friendly with post-its, for instance. I won't read all this to you, but instead of mapping the places where the information is resting and the channels used to transmit information, we are concentrating, or we are starting for the actual pieces of information. Here you have some examples. The data of the people doing the reports, accounting books, investigation articles, reports, media sources, like the actual pieces of information, the identity, the contacts of our sources, etc. And then we are suggesting here to talk about integrity, confidentiality, and availability just as a tool. Like here, the important things to know is that in information security, we are using these three concepts to describe compromise. For instance, availability. Something should be when I have an information and then I don't have it anymore. For instance, if I have a database and somebody deletes the database and I cannot recover it, that's a problem with availability because the information is no longer there. The other thing here is integrity. I have a database with human rights violations. And what happens is if something of someone goes into the database and start contaminating the data and start changing things and start, I don't know, yeah, changing information, then the integrity of that data was affected. That's the concept behind that example. And also we have confidentiality. What happens if somebody steals that database and leak it on internet? There you will have that example I talked about in the last session where one organization, a database of victims was leaked and survivors of some violations was leaked and some people started to appear dead. That was a confidentiality issue because some people that shouldn't have that information had it. So that's the concept behind that third example. However, this is a tool, a help. This is something we can explain the organization during the activity, so they can have better starting points to map the data pieces. And then this activity proposed to separate everything into 6 different kinds of consequences: digital, physical, emotional, judicial, administrative, and economic. Here there are explanation of the definition of each one of them and an example. Like the bad things that might happen in the digital, physical, emotional, etc., like realms are here as an example again. And from there, basically we build the same exercise I just described in the Excel file. Okay, we try to map which one of these consequences is high, medium, low, etc. And we try to map that to the actual pieces of information. Okay, the complaints, the victims, the database of victims of human rights or witnesses or things like that, it's aligned to this battery of consequences. So the compromise of this information is high. Okay, is high, and so on. So it's very cool because you can actually know with great level of detail that if the communications with sources is leaked or it's compromised, is a medium like sensitivity because some of these things might happen if that information is compromised. Basically that, and that's very, very valuable both for the organization and also for us. And this is the 0103. So 0104 will basically plug all of that mapping to the activity that we just described in the Excel file. Okay, you map the places where information rests, and you map also the communication channels, and you use high, medium, low, and null, like no impact, no sensitivity, and then you repeat the same thing, but with the knowledge that you know why each piece is high, medium, low, or null in terms of, and then you can draw some conclusions from there. So it's very long. It can be a long activity, but the output is just super detailed, super granular, and that can also be good and interesting. You have the link in the chat. Thank you, Jean. And also you will have the link in the slides. Okay. Okay, this is the animations of these are not working very well, but you have everything in there. Yeah, questions so far about data assessment? Great. You can always write, so no problems. If you didn't miss the opportunity, you can write, but maybe I can move forward. I'm seeing here that probably we are ending early, at least with the content, so that's a good thing. Process analysis. This part it's kind of a conflicting thoughts here because process analysis is crucial, is super important. Understanding the processes of the organization, it's the key to truly personalize an audit to each organization. So that's important. However, there are many ways to approach process analysis, and for instance, in my case, this is so important that I integrate process analysis in everything. So I don't usually have a standalone activity that is process analysis. Okay, I try to build the process, lay out the process, and see vulnerabilities in the process everywhere, in every interview, in every technical assessment, in all the risk and data assessment activities, everything. However, is crucial again to understand that what parts of the process analysis activity should we conduct, regardless of the way we are trying to do this. Why we want to do this, or the idea behind this activity is breaking down processes in parts, so you can identify risks and threats and all of that in specific parts of these processes. Okay, sometimes it seems very complicated for people to see this, to find vulnerabilities in a process because they see everything as a whole. Classical example, the journalistic process. Like you have a journalist that goes to the field and they gather some pieces, then they build an article, or they build a video, they build stuff like that alone or with the help of other people. Especially when I said video, I thought like some media outlets, they have dedicated people to work with multimedia. Then that goes to an editor, then the editor tries to see, to review, to back and forth with the journalist so they can polish the piece, and after that it might go for publishing. If you say how can we secure the journalistic process, it may be very complicated for these people because there are a lot of moving parts there. And I swear that I gave sometimes a very reduced and abstracted example of that process. Sometimes it's way more complicated than that. We are involving bigger teams, we are involving many editors, we are involving some technology considerations here. You need to anonymize maybe people you are interviewing, a lot of things. Okay, so as a whole process is very difficult. However, for when you break down the process into these small pieces, you can actually try to assess better. For instance, if we are talking about the journalists in the field gathering the pieces, now we can think about a lot of things, a lot of recommendations that we can do, like how they are protecting, if they are taking pictures or using voice recorders, they are protecting the cards, the memory cards. They are what are the security measures for like physical security measures. They are bringing their devices. The cell phones that these people are bringing into the field are blocked with a strong password. Then you can, a whole world opens in every step of the process. So that's one of the reasons it's very cool, very important to break down the processes into smaller pieces. And there are many ways to do this. The most basic one, if you want to document that, is a simple bullet point list, like step 1, step 2, step 3, and from there you go. I also like flowcharts. I don't use flowcharts that much because that requires time I usually don't have in the middle of an audit, but flowcharts are amazing. And the way I tell you I try to do this at least is integrating this into all the activities. There in the right you have the name of the method associated in SAFETAG and to process analysis as a standalone activity. And well, yeah, the idea is to find vulnerabilities in the different steps of the process. But I'm gonna show that's here and that's here. Yeah, this is one activity. I'm gonna show you the entire route. If you are in the SafeTag website, there is somewhere here a method called process mapping and risk modeling. You click here, you can read all of this. It's a very good method. It's really well written, and you will find here some activities. In case you want to keep talking about this or seeing references, you have the risk matrix here. Yeah, you have some activities here that might be cool. However, I'm interested in process mapping. Okay, then you will be here. Okay, just to remind you a couple of things here, the approach is interpersonal. So we expect this activity to be more on the facilitation side, talking with people, and so on. So, okay, you will have the summary, you will have a lot of very useful information here, considerations, and the walkthrough. Here, the idea for these activities is in the walkthrough section, you will have the steps that you will need to follow to actually conduct the activity. So here it's telling you, if you have the people, list all of the organizational processes. Here you have examples. Payments. I didn't talk about payments. Sometimes this is a very difficult process and sensitive one. Then once you have the list of the organizational processes, you will try to determine which ones are critical. Okay, so you might choose 1, 2, 3, depending on how much time that you have and how complex these processes are. You can try to list the critical ones, and probably for those critical ones, the next step will be mapping out. Like you can have a flip chart, a whiteboard. You can have a pad, a document. If you have a projector or a Google Doc document, could also work. And you try to lay out all of the steps that I described, like step 1, 2, 3 of the process. Considerations, interesting, the people involved, the tasks, conversations, and decisions they carry out, flow of materials, etc. This is very, very well written. And then identify points of failure. As I said, like if you have the journalists in the field, what can go wrong? This is super tied to the risk, the threat assessment exercise, and you will have also these recommendations. That's kind of an overview of this specific activity, and any other activity won't be too different. Okay, so yeah, I don't know if you have any questions or something like that. Cool. Well, so far we covered today, not a lot, but like 3 topics were very dense ones. We have threat assessment, threat modeling, risk analysis, data assessment or information flow analysis, and process analysis. Very briefly, but we for sure covered the most important parts of it. And with that, we believe these 3 activities or these 3 aspects are the initial part that should be kickstarting the entire audit process. With all of the information that we got here, we know better which computers we should be assessing, which parts of the websites we should be assessing, and so on. Okay, in many cases, once we do these activities, when we conduct these activities, we change the rest of the agenda for the audit. maybe we remove one activity that is not super important at this point, or maybe we add more activities because we discover new technologies or new processes that we didn't know about in our previous interviews, or it's just a thing of balancing. Maybe I thought that interviews will be, I don't know, half a day, and now I want to interview more people, so maybe I will do half an entire day of interviews, so I need to cut on time on another activity and stuff like that. Yeah. And then for Thursday we are starting to talk about ones and zeros and technical tools. There is another component that is on the facilitation side, but it will be more than 3 activities. I can swear. So yeah, some of these activities, interviews, are not very technical necessarily. User device assessments to assess computers and phones mostly. A physical security assessment, and then we can start with things like network mapping, vulnerability assessments in basic or level 1, as I like to say. And yeah, basically we are there. So again, you have another chance to ask questions. Yeah, also promising it will be a little bit more interactive. Yeah, so I can give you like 1 more minute, and if there are no questions, we might you might wait for you can wait for me with the video and the slides and the links, and yeah, that can also work, and we see each other on Thursday.
Thank you, Carlos.